Let's take a look at your first part of your final projects, your illustrative word. I think everyone overall has some strong starts. I have some potential suggestions, revisions for you guys. Nothing too major, but we'll get started and take a look. I'm going to preview it from my Finder window as it's a little bit easier than trying to go through Illustrator here. I also know that I've talked to some of you in class and we worked on some things. So you might already be working or probably are already working on some of the revisions and they look a little bit different than these, but I just wanted to make sure that everybody had a chance to see these as well. So we'll start here with Mars. Yeah, I think overall we talked about your sort of little mushroom growths there work really well. Overall, and your text works really well. The sort of curve that you have to the text, your highlights work really well, where you have these spots and you're adding a little bit of highlight. My minor suggestion for this would be maybe adding a little bit of that sort of similar depth in your lettering. They're a little bit flat. You have this nice sort of like three-dimensional. It's very illustrative, but you have this nice three-dimensional look with your highlights or with your caps, and then your word is kind of flat. So if you kind of had like a similar treatment to your word as you do with your white spots, I think that would look really cool to sort of push that. And then I might move this up just so it's so there's not so much space just to sort of like finalize the design as for like sort of final presentation. I would split the difference, maybe have your the rooms sort of start here or even offset it a little bit just to give it a little bit more dynamics, but definitely closer together. But yeah, I think overall a really great start, nice illustrative work, and just some a little bit more detail in the word and moving it around. I think could really sort of refine this and finish it off a little bit more. All right. So I know that this was for in sort of in conjunction with a longer term project in a class that you were working with. We talked about that before. I'm not sure if these lines are actually in your logo for your other class. If not, if they're just a design element for this particular project, that's totally fine. What I might do is, and this might again, if you didn't want to do this for the logo, I think overall, I think it might be a little bit too much, or they're spread out a little bit, all over the place a bit. I might elongate these a little bit more, and then have kind of like three, um, sort of stacked on each other. So you had one, two, three, and then a little bit of an angle to give it that that motion, and then you could kind of have them, you know, not all over the place, but if you had three down here and then three up here or two, I think they're just kind of like how you have it here a little bit, you know, not that you want to have it the same group over and over again, but I think that they're um, a little bit too spread out where like usually like a fast action line is a little bit more consistent, if that makes sense. Even I think trying to carry them all the way through all the way across all of them might lead to some odd readability issues, but yeah, I think overall I think it works really well. I might try to play around with making your um, ports part of sports a little bit bigger. We talked about that a little bit in class, so if you've changed it since, then that's fine. But I think I like the idea of the motion lines. Again, I would just kind of like make them a little bit more consistent. You can also look into sort of how these have been carried out before. If you do a little bit of research with like movement lines and logos, things like that, just to sort of give it a little bit more legibility and just a little bit more consistency in your design. All right, and then Amanda's we talked about in class, and you've changed it. This, I believe, was the final. I think with this, I think it works you know, overall it works pretty well. I like how you have this sort of circular element. We talked about adding some of these motion lines, and then we talked about sort of refining the text a little bit more here, as you had like one of your originals where we kind of had this motion line starting and this motion line starting, so to add a couple of those motion lines. But we talked about adding some more solid text on top just so that it was a little bit more easily readable, which I think works well here. I think we might have gone a little bit too much with the effect you have on here. I would try scaling back that that effect a little bit, since you have so much motion and so much of that effect. And I know we talked about some other things in class as well. And I'm blanking on some of the ones that we talked about, but I think overall, I think just like reducing this sort of feathered look and making that a little bit more solid, so it's a little bit more legible, but keeping it black and keeping it consistent so it reads a little bit better. But I think with some of the revisions that we talked about in class, I think this works really well. All right, and we'll do Ashton's. So we had, again, this is another one we talked about in class. I think it's really well done. Fairly simple, fairly effective use of this. So we talked about, this was the first iteration. He's already done his revision based on some feedback, so I wanted to show you both of those. But we have our cut with the old school kind of cutout scissor guides, and then he cut the word, and we figured to give it a little bit more action, a little bit more dynamics, to actually make that cut look like it's falling off. One sort of like final suggestion, you can try it if you like it. If you don't, that's fine. I think maybe it might be kind of interesting to sort of split the difference and have like the left side, or decide which side, the left side or the right side, be rotated instead of both sides. So it looks like one is kind of falling from where you cut it, even if this is rotated at the same angle, so it's falling away to the left, you know what I mean? So this side, you rotate it from this angle down instead of having it come in this way, if that makes sense. And then have the UT straight, or vice versa. But I think having sort of one side at an angle rather than both sides might give it sort of a little bit more of that action, as if it's like falling after you cut it. So you're kind of like holding the one side and the other side is kind of falling off. That would be my last sort of minor suggestion with this one. But I think overall, again, a really nice use of a simple, clean, effective way to sort of illustrate this action word. All right, and we have Lauren's here. So I think I really like this one. I shouldn't say I think, I do like this one. I think what you could do with this potentially is to bring this W in. I like your idea of the A as your pencil or pen or your drawing implement. I might have these lines be a little bit thicker, similar to how you have your text lines. So it's a little bit, somewhat a little bit more obvious that it's the A of the draw. I think it might be kind of cool as well to have the W potentially look like it's drawn, maybe a different font, or even like if you use your brush tool or your pen tool to kind of like make a W, it might be kind of cool to potentially see how it looks like if that W looked drawn, as if it like started here, came up, and then ended right here. But yeah, I would definitely make this a little bit more bold so that you read it as an A, more so than just your pen or pencil. And then I think working on your kerning a little bit, bringing this in, bringing that space in a bit to sort of bring those all together. But I think again could be a really simple, clean, effective use of illustrating this word. All right, then we'll go to Sarah's, and then there's two here. Oh yeah. So you had two. I think it's previewing funky. My suggestion for your two, and I believe we talked about this in class, was kind of splitting the difference between the two. I really like how you have more color behind the letters here. In this one, you have a bit of a cleaner font, but the colors are a bit disappearing. And then I would make this sort of more obvious that it's an A. Have your, you might need to work with your layer ordering So, oops, I was trying to zoom in a little bit here. To maybe make sure that this looks like an A, have the brush coming out on top to sort of show that it's like that right kind of arm of the A. Maybe make it a little bit more obvious that it's an A. And I honestly might even go with create instead of created. Take the D, get rid of that last letter there, so it's just create rather than created. I think that create might read a little bit easier. It's a little bit sort of like less clunky, if that makes sense. But yeah, I think kind of like splitting the difference between this stylization and this stylization, I think works really well. And then just kind of like working with your potential object ordering, you might need to cut it if these are two different shapes. So it looks like the overlap is there. We can go over that in class as well. But I think sort of making that a little bit more obvious that it's an A and having the brush be on top of the palette, I think could work really well. And then Eileen. Again, we talked about this in class, but I figured I would show you. So this was the first iteration of it. Great illustration, great concept. We talked about the idea of forming the letters a little bit more so it looks like it's the controller or the game, right? So rather than just have game within the screen, so we were thinking about having like the G be here, and then the A and the M, and then an E be on this side, either capital or lowercase, depending on how it worked. But you could even use this sort of shape to cut your E, basically, so it looks like the G and the E are the ends of the controller, and then working the buttons into those letters, and then having the A and the M be part of the screen, so that overall the actual controller is made out of letters, and then the wire comes out of the top of either the A or the M, or even in between. But that was the idea. We thought that this was a really strong concept, a great start for a concept. But again, sort of forming the letters to make the controller rather than a controller with just a word on top of it. Again, we talked about this in class, and I'll show at a later date. We'll show in class maybe what we're talking about and the revisions there. But I just wanted to make sure you guys saw that, and then also saw the feedback from that from this piece as well, even though we talked about this in class. So I think overall this is a great start for your illustrated words. We have plenty of time to play around with these and do some revisions, and again to talk about these in class should you have any questions or need more help with these.